My name is Clara Chow, and I am 24, but I'll be 25 on Saturday. So I guess the best answer is almost 25.
And what is your story? How are you working to solve today's problems? How did you get from wherever to where you are now?
Well, I think my biggest social entrepreneurship adventure is Youth Bank. So, like I said, Youth Bank is a small business incubator for street youth. We work in Lagos, the world's fastest growing megacity. We're going to Mumbai next year, and we have plans to expand. We've received invitations from 10 different countries because we have a really exciting business model. I started working on it when I was in college. And basically the question we were trying to answer was, how can you translate the phenomenal success of microfinance, which has done so much to lift, say, rural women in Bangladesh out of poverty? How can you translate that to a very urban context, particularly slum communities working with a population that's largely considered unemployable, namely street youth, homeless, unemployed, underemployed young people who may be involved in gang activity or prostitution.
Cool. And how old were you when you started this, and what inspired you to take action? Was there a moment you decided, or was it more of a gradual realization?
I think I started with Youth Bank my freshman year, so I must have been 17 or 18. Actually, I was 18. But I think the idea really evolved over my college experience, and I didn't actually start working on Youth Bank under the current model until I started my first job. So I know that organizations like Echo and Green talk about a moment of obligation. Right? I think that's kind of what you're asking about. And I think my moment of obligation came when, right after my freshman year at Wharton, I actually went back to my hometown of Toronto, and I was working on a startup social enterprise program. So we brought 30 young people from Zimbabwe, from Iran, from Pakistan, Paraguay, Nigeria, New Zealand. And I met this young person from Nigeria named Theo, and he had this dream. He was a former street youth, and he was trying to create a Grameen Bank of West Africa. And so I got really excited. His story was really compelling, and it was kind of like an Oliver Twist set in modern times in the slums of Lagos. And I think my moment of obligation came when, as I was looking at his business plan after having met him, I started to realize that one of the reasons why some of his pilot experiments had failed was that hyper-urban Lagos is very different from rural Bangladesh, and that more particularly, I actually might have the tools or ideas to make this program work. At the time, I was taking a venture capital class. And in Toronto, as a younger, in high school, I'd actually done a lot of work with marginalized youth. In particular, I was aware of this group called All Aboard Youth Initiative, where they actually took at-risk youth, young people who had some brush with the youth criminal justice system, and they gave them a year of transition where they could actually work at the All Aboard restaurant, and after that have solid work experience and also kind of build this camaraderie. And so I kind of cobbled together all these experiences and applied them to the business plan I saw in front of me, and I realized that while the need was great, the microfinance model, the traditional microfinance model, might not be the most effective in this situation. And I think that was my moment of obligation when I realized there might be another way and I could help us get there.
Cool. How are some ways you've worked across maybe traditionally defined boundaries to get things done?
I think we work across two different kinds of boundaries. First of all, what I think is really cool about the Youth Bank team, soon to be renamed Generation Enterprise, which I'll tell you about later, but what I think is really cool about it is we're all young people, we're all volunteers, and we come from, I think, 6 different time zones, 4 different continents. So I've got teammates. One of my teammates, who's the director of our program, works for Singapore Airlines and lives in Singapore. One of our team members working on the enterprise portfolio, helping the fellows build their businesses, he works for the Energy Ministry of Trinidad and Tobago, so that's where he lives. A lot of my fellow kind of American teammates are scattered across the nation, East Coast, West Coast. And then we've also got a strong team in Nigeria, in Lagos. So I think one of the boundaries we certainly cross, or definitely one of the boundaries we cross, is that of geography or culture or even time zones. The second one that I think we work across is the boundary of, or the artificial boundaries between disciplines. I think the approach that we've chosen to take, this incubator model for street youth, works across all three sectors. So we work with public sector partners. In fact, we're working right now with the Lagos state government to scale the program across the state in Lagos. We are using private sector tools, namely kind of finance, a lot of the tools in consulting, dashboards, metrics. So those private sector tools are being used. And then we're a social sector organization, I think. Even though we're focused on business building and creating employment in low-income communities, we ourselves are a nonprofit. And so, we operate within the constraints and grapple with the challenges that all nonprofits face, namely, how do you avoid mission drift? How do you ensure the financial health of your organization? How do you engage various stakeholders, since clearly you don't have all the resources yourself? So how can you act as a kind of a convener of other people, and how do you get them to buy into your mission and support your work?
What are some of the challenges you see facing young people, either in the U.S. or across the world?
I think the first one off the top of my head is unemployment. I think, especially given after the ravages of the Great Recession in particular, I think there is this sense of uncertainty, a lack of resources, reduced opportunities and life chances. And I think it's particularly acute for young people who should be just starting their career and often enter the workforce with a lot of ambition and drive, and perhaps are finding that, they have to settle for something that doesn't allow them to make as much impact as they envision. One thing that I find interesting that dovetails directly with youth bank's work is the fact that we're actually in the middle of the largest youth cohort in human history. So never before have there been as many young people, both in absolute terms and as a percentage of the population. This is a World Bank statistic. And a lot of the people I've talked to who are supporters of our work have brought up they talk about two concepts simultaneously. One is that there's a demographic dividend, right? That all these young people represent untold potential for economic growth and innovation. But on the other hand, they also say ticking time bomb. That's another phrase I hear a lot. And that's because if these young people aren't able to find the right opportunities, or they aren't able to kind of channel their talents and energies into something productive, a lot of both private sector and public sector leaders see this as a real threat. It's a social justice issue, I think, because young people, especially street youth, who can't find employment end up kind of eking out a living in a marginal way in the informal economy. I think it's obviously an economic issue because these young people cost billions of dollars in lost potential. And the stakes are very high. I remember seeing ILO statistics saying that if you could just have youth unemployment in sub-Saharan Africa, it would raise their GDP by 12 to 19%, just like that.
Wow.
And then thirdly, I think it's actually a national security issue. I mean, it's a lot of young people, especially the young people we work with, but young people in general, discontented young people in particular, are prime recruiting grounds for criminal organizations, whether it's the local gang in Lagos or whether it's the terrorist cell. So, I think unemployment is sort of front and center for our generation.
Yeah. Well, what advice would you give to youth who want to get more involved in their communities, political process, youth issues, mobilization? What would you tell them?
Three things, I think. First, I would say get informed. There's a lot of really exciting work going on right now, and I think never before have words like social enterprise and microfinance and triple bottom line, corporate social responsibility. These are terms that are in the common parlance more than ever. I think it's really unprecedented, the fact that a lot of young people are starting organizations or are just, even if they're just following someone on Facebook or they're a fan of someone on Facebook or they're following someone on Twitter, I think people are more engaged and there is a sense that you can find out more about the world and do something about it. So I think in terms of things to read, I'd recommend reading reports by Bridgespan or the Stanford Social Innovation Review. The McKinsey Quarterly actually has a special social sector edition, and Harvard Business Review actually even identifies social enterprise or social entrepreneurship as a section of their publications. I can recommend some books too. I mean, I know for me, one thing that really helped me get informed, or at least really get excited about working in the social sector, was Wendy Kopp's book, One Day All Children. and Jacqueline Novogratz' book, The Blue Sweater. And both of them document both the issues they're trying to address. So in Wendy Cobb's case, inequalities in education, and in Jacqueline Novogratz's case, this idea of investing in businesses that create employment in low-income communities, so patient capital. And I think both of them both document the issues and also the struggles you face and the challenges and triumphs you face as a young social entrepreneur. So getting informed is one. Secondly, I'd say get involved. I think I was reading Malcolm Gladwell's article in which he kind of asserts that the revolution will not be tweeted. I think it's very easy these days to, just follow someone or be a fan, but I think Gladwell's point, which I agree with, is that that's not enough to cause real change. It's a great way to get engaged and to get started and get informed, but the next step, leadership, actually making a contribution, is not as tidy as just clicking on something with a mouse or tapping your computer screen or your iPhone screen. So I think actually getting involved in something, however small, is a big step to actually really making a contribution. And then the third thing I think is just getting others to work together. One thing that I've noticed also is, with this huge proliferation of youth-led organizations, I think it's great because there's all this energy, but at the same time, the sector is now very fragmented. And I think, it's not easy to start an organization, to manage a team, to join this cacophony of people kind of hawking their wares and saying, oh, support my cause, support my cause. I think one thing that we'll need to see in the next 5 to 10 years for sure is kind of more coalition building, more cooperation. And that's not always easy because I think there's a sense of ownership that young people feel about their organizations as well. But finding a great way to work together and kind of being that bridge would be terrific for young people who are interested in getting involved and really making a contribution.